we continue the big game look ahead here. To be joined by the one and only Gil Alexander, host of VSiN's A Number Game and host of the Beating the Books podcast, and follow him on X. There's a lot of ands here at Beating the Book. Gil Alexander, how are you, my friend?
How you doing, Dave? How you doing, Wes? Thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
It's great to have you because we're excited now that we finally have, we do, as Bill Parcells said so many years ago, that's why you lift all that damn weight. We get finally to the Super Bowl, Gil, and we want to have the sharpest minds on here. We've already seen the number drop from 2.5 here, where it opened up for the Niners, down to ones we're already seeing, in a total of 47.5. Before you get to that line movement, was there anything that surprised you about today? Because I got to be honest, I thought that the Niners were dead, and then, of course, they were not.
What didn't surprise me about today? The Niners were dead this week, and they were dead last week. And here they are, headed to the Super Bowl. I mean, that game we just saw with the Niners and Lions was just unbelievable. First of all, 2 games in one, obviously, the old tale of 2 halves. And then I just thought, obviously there were some things that went the Niners' way. That that long, deep catch to Ayuk off the deflection was huge. But obviously a lot of the talk's going to be around Dan Campbell and not kicking a game-tying field goal on 4th and 4. And I would argue, as much as that will be debated, but what can't be debated to me was running the football on 3rd and goal with all of your timeouts still intact. You cannot afford the risk at that moment of getting stopped and having to burn a timeout, because essentially then you're relying on your onside kick, and we all know how that goes. So that to me was just a huge blunder. And, other than that, it's funny, on Twitter I still got a couple guys going after Brock Purdy, and I'm like, are you kidding me? Like, to me, he was gutsy and made up for what was an atrocious Niners defensive performance in the first half, and you're still talking about Purdy. Amazing.
Yeah,
so that was incredible. And the other thing, real quick, that surprised me, I just couldn't believe how flat the Ravens were.
Yeah.
And I couldn't believe that they called 8 running plays. A team that had 35 games in a row of over 100 rushing yards, that gets snapped with 8 running calls. What did you make of that? That was unbelievable.
That was where I think the game was lost, Gil, for the Ravens, and that's what surprised me. It's like, okay, you run the ball as well as anybody in the league, and you're facing the defense that's 27th in DVOA or whatever metrics you want to use in terms of evaluating a team's performance on that specific part of the game. And Gus Edwards and Justice Hill had 6 carries combined today. And I know part and parcel you get behind, but I just felt that the game plan, and I was surprised to see John Harbaugh, who I think pretty highly of, and his coordinators just come out with a dreadful game plan today.
It was dreadful. That, more than anything today, was the most unconscionable thing. Like, how did they get away from that? I just don't understand what they were thinking. And, and then Steve Spagnuolo deserves all the credit in the world because, one of the, what is Lamar Jackson's kryptonite? Getting blitzed profusely. He's actually one of the worst, EPA players in the league in terms of getting blitzed a lot. He's down at the bottom, and it showed today. He wasn't very good. And this is just one of those things where you watch that game and you're like, wow, that's the MVP. And in the end, you realize, like, if for anybody, I didn't have any play in this game, though I did have some exactas with the Ravens. But you recognize watching that game, you're like, what were any of us thinking? When we saw the Chiefs, I'm just trying to think what their low point was this year. Maybe it was that game against the Raiders, where they still lost, even though Aiden O'Connell didn't have a completion after the first quarter. And you just think, that team, if you had told us at that moment watching that game, hey, that team's still going to the Super Bowl, we would have thought that person's crazy for telling us that. But then in the end, it's Patrick Mahomes, man. Just incredible.
It is. And I think, Gil, we sometimes in the media, whatever, extended, we fall in those traps of, we make these determinations of certain teams at certain times of the season and say they're done. They have gotten better. You can see it. It's still not the Chiefs of old with Tyreek Hill, that's for sure. And even with a banged-up Pacheco today, they still figured out a way to get some stuff done in the first half. Can they gut out one more game? I mean, yes, of course they can, but is it going to take a Herculean 15 performance from the 2-time MVP and Patrick Mahomes, who's still the reigning MVP as of right now? Is it going to take that, or are they getting better enough that he doesn't have to be Superman to beat the Niners?
Well, before I even answer that, let me just say you made a great point in there, I think, Dave, which shouldn't get glossed over, which is, we added a 17th game here in recent years, of course. And we just have to realize that I think we're all guilty of this. I raise my hand, I'll stand in the front of the line. But we all go through this 4-month regular season, and we're all so immersed in it. We're all so wrapped up in every game and every play of every game. And the recency bias is real. We all fight that. I think we do a better job of most in fighting it. But even us, right? No team is as good as it is one week or as bad as they are one week. But I think we've gotten to the point in the NFL season where there's so much parity, and it's such a long season now with the extra game added, that even a team at its worst stretch, let's say now, not even their worst game, or their best stretch, we have to kind of temper our feelings in that moment more than we ever have before. Look at how bad the Chiefs were at one point. The Lions getting crushed by the Ravens at one point. This team doesn't even deserve. This team can't possibly compete for a Super Bowl, and yet they were on the cusp of it today. To your point about the game, I mean, I think the spread is, what the look ahead was 1.5 on this. It's 1 right now. I wouldn't be surprised if it's a pick'em at kickoff. I really wouldn't be. I know most Super Bowls aren't usually pick'ems, but I do think you have, Mahomes, Michael Jordan, with Travis Kelce, who was just spectacular today, and not much else offensively that you can rely on, quite frankly, against, and with a great kicker in Harrison Butker, and a pretty darn good solid defense against a Niners team that is super elite on offense with tons of weapons, a really sort of subpar kicker, which I think gets glossed over also, in Jake Moody. After all, he's a rookie. We don't know what we get from him. I shouldn't say subpar, but I'm not sure we know what we're going to get from him. And then a defense, that Niners defense to me is the real question because they looked bad last week. They looked so bad this week. I was just talking on Friday on a numbers game. I'm like, yeah, well, they're still strong in the middle, and the Lions are really good over the middle. So the Niners should be able to, mitigate against that. That didn't happen, man. The Niners, and they get gashed a lot still. So I don't know. I mean, there's a lot of moving parts in this, and I do think it's probably a toss-up.
So, Gil, let me pick up on something that you mentioned earlier here in the segment, and you talked about Brock Purdy being gutsy in the second half. 2 weeks in a row, they get down, and then they find a way to win, largely because Brock Purdy, where it's like he's forced to make plays. You can't just rely on the running game. You can't just rely on McCaffrey. And he has made plays. He got fortunate with the bounce to Ayuk today off of Vildor's helmet that obviously kind of changed the tide of the game. But I want to ask you in terms of recency bias, which you mentioned, is this okay? The 49ers have gotten lucky, quote-unquote lucky, the last 2 weeks, so now we see the early money against them. Or is there something to be said for that where it's like, okay, yeah, they didn't cover twice as big favorites, but they found a way both times. Which side do you more veer towards? 49ers being lucky or 49ers being gutsy?
I'm going to thread the needle a little bit, Wes. I'm going to go with more that they're gutsy, and that no matter how poorly they're playing, they found a way both weeks. However, you can't do that against Patrick Mahomes, right? Like, you can't dig a hole against Mahomes and expect to come out of it as you can against the Packers and the Lions. It's just not the same animal. So, I mean, I think they do. Obviously, Niners detractors are going to say, "Oh, they're so lucky." Look, they're not lucky. They're a really, really good football team. I don't know if they're as historically great as some of the advanced metrics spots will tell you they are, because that defense again is real suspect. But I think, Wes, to answer your question, I think to me it's more of a testament to how good they are. They figured out ways to win those games. I think Brock Purdy is still underrated. People are always looking for a reason to blame him for anything. He does not get the grace that other players get when they make mistakes. But Michael Jordan's on the other side of the field this time in 2 weeks. And they know very well from, a few years back, what this guy's all about. And they had a lead in I want to say early fourth quarter in that Super Bowl. Yeah. If I'm not mistaken. Correct me if I'm wrong. So they know what they're up against. So they can't dig themselves a hole this time.
10 seconds to go. Can I interest you in your Commanders at 100-1 to win the Super Bowl next year?
You cannot, sir. Thank you for offering.
There he is, everybody. Gil, thanks so much for the time, man. We appreciate it.
Thanks, guys.
Great stuff from Gil. Again, give him a follow on X at Beating the Book.
Go to VSiN.com/subscribe to become a VSiN Pro subscriber today.